Good morning. So welcome back. How was your first day? Was it okay? Yeah, I'm actually very happy to be here. Not because like everybody says that, and I'm not saying that to every conference I'm going to, so don't get me wrong. The reason I'm saying that is because 10 years ago, actually in the room C over there, was the very first time when I did a public speaking. Wasn't by choice, I would say, because I submitted to a conference, they didn't accept my talk, but then they got a cancellation. And the last minute they came to me and said, oh, would you like to present something at the conference? Like, yeah, that would be an interesting thing. But then I asked, when do I need to present? Oh, no problem, tomorrow morning at 9. I'm looking at the watch, it was midnight, I was at the lobby bar. Like, what would you do in a situation like that? Of course, you continue drinking, so I was drinking till 2 a.m., then went to bed, woke up, have a little bit of a breakfast, and then just went to do the presentation. It was a total disaster. Of course, I was expecting that, but at the same time, I got a taste for doing presentations in public, and I really like doing that nowadays. My name is Tiberiu COVACI. I'm originally from Romania. And I moved around for the past 22 years all over the world. I lived 15 years in Sweden, I lived in Bermuda, I lived in London, I lived in Tenerife, I lived in Cayman Islands. Now I'm back in Sweden, so don't ask me why. Yeah, I'm back in Sweden. So I'm back to where I started 22 years ago, I would say. I work for a company in Denmark called Cloudion. My title is Head of Cloud Academy. But I'm doing, so not only education, I'm doing all kind of things to try to improve the quality of the work we are doing inside our company and for our customers. I do a lot of speaking nowadays. I've been doing that, again, for the past 10 years. I'm a Microsoft Regional Director. It doesn't mean I work for Microsoft. Actually, usually it's a misnomer this, because you don't work for Microsoft, you are not directing anything, and you don't have a region or anything to direct either. So the regional director being a program where Microsoft recognizes us as thought leaders in a certain technical area. So they come to us for advice, and we work with them together. And I'm a most valuable professional. What that means, it means that I spend way too much time, to give free work to Microsoft, as a reward for that, I get to come in front of you and or even go to them and speak about their technologies. So enough about me. Let's talk a little bit about the agenda. And maybe you have noticed this is a two-part session. And I think it's still not fair. Normally we do that as either half-day workshop or as a whole-day workshop, mainly because there are so many technologies and so many things that Microsoft does every single year that it's a little bit too hard, to just present those things in two sessions. But what we did in order to be able to still present the content, we cut down the demos. If you want to do the demos, I think there are available online, many of them, plenty of them, so I won't have to do that. And I will start talking about the stuff, and I will go for as long as possible in the first part. Then we take the 20 minutes break for coffee, and then we come back, and then we continue for another 50 minutes. Before we finish the first one, I will tell you what's left in the second one, so you can make a choice if you want to come back or if you want to go to see another session as well. So it would be up to you for the second part as well. So what we are going to start to talk about is where we are at today. What exactly are we going to talk about? What exactly is Microsoft doing today? Then we are going to look at Visual Studio.net. Then we are going to talk a little bit about different development platforms. We are going to talk about Visual Studio as well as a tool for developing applications. Of course, it can't be, a modern talk without talking about containers. Everybody needs to have containers and maybe microservices and stuff in their talk, so I had to include that as well. And last but not least, I'm going to talk about Azure and the cloud, and of course, artificial intelligence and machine learning as parts of what the cloud has to offer. So let's get started. First of all, let's talk about Microsoft today. I've been in this industry for over 25 years, so I know I'm old. My very first version of Visual tools was called Visual C++. The version was 1.5. That was back in 1994. So I started a long time ago working with Microsoft tools. And I've seen the waves. I've seen it coming and going. So at some point, Microsoft was one of the, like the most developer-friendly companies. Then Bill Gates decided to leave, and then Steve Ballmer took over, and then it became a marketing and sales machine that didn't care about the developers. But now Satya is back. And with that, Microsoft is back. If you look at what Microsoft is doing today and what they're trying to do, they are friendlier, they are cooler, they're helping us as developers. They are listening to what we have to say as customers as well. So there are a lot of things happening, and Microsoft just takes the feedback and tries to do something about that. If you look at how many things they are doing in the operating system area, they're actually still the leaders. And not only with Windows, they're contributing a lot to Linux as well. Why? There is a running joke saying that Azure runs on Linux. I'm not really sure, but about half of the workloads you would see in Azure are Linux-based. So, of course, Microsoft wants to be part of that. If you look at the enterprise-level software, again, there is the same situation. You have a lot of Windows machines, but you have a lot of open-source operating systems, like Linux-based. So that's why Microsoft wants to be part of that as well. And of course, they have an ecosystem that grows rapidly. If you look at all the services that they are offering, if you look at all those Tuesday newsletters about what's new with Azure, I think you would be scared because there is so much happening all the time that it's virtually impossible for anyone, for any single one person to take, to do that, to keep up with all those technologies. And of course, they changed the way they develop their tools and their products. If you look at the pace of releasing new stuff, it's incredible. They have teams that release every other week. They have teams that release once a month, and they still have the operating system that they release once every 6 months. Of course, when it's working, because 1809 it's still not out. But that's again a different story. So when they release something like an operating system, they need to make sure that it's very stable because they will affect about 800 million machines worldwide if they choose to develop. And it's not only that. Microsoft is embracing everything. So Linux, Apple, HTML5, Android, whatever you want, Microsoft has it on their menu. And I don't know if I've been at a conference a couple of years back before Microsoft became that, embracing everything Microsoft, where one of the organizers came with a sticker to put it, on an Apple logo on a machine, so you wouldn't be allowed to present on a Microsoft conference with an Apple machine. That was the extent of not everything, and look where we are now. Like when they are showing demos, they are showing them on iPhones, on Androids. They don't care about the device you are using. And of course, we have an open Microsoft. If you look at what Microsoft has done lately in the open source area, they are the biggest contributor ever. Everybody looks and they said, yeah, there are a lot of people from Google, a lot of people from Facebook, from Amazon, but the biggest number of contributors and the biggest number of commits comes from Microsoft. And they started with ASP.NET Core. So when they started with ASP.NET Core, they decided that it's time to do that as an open source project. So everything it's out in the open. If you want to commit, if you want to work, if you want to send a pull request, Microsoft will have you go through a lot of legal hoops and stuff like that just to make sure that you're not coming back after that and say, oh, I gave you this piece of code, now you owe me money or something. So they need to make sure that everything it's actually correctly done. And then all those team meetings happen in the open, so everybody can be in a listening mode. They can listen to what they decide to do. Everybody can report issues, and they are working on that accordingly. So that's a very bold move from Microsoft. And let's not forget, they bought GitHub. And a lot of people are scared about that. I would say that was actually a very good move. There are several reasons for that. Once Microsoft is very much invested, they have a lot of things that they put on GitHub. So of course they want to make sure that GitHub does the things, correctly. Then the other thing is they bought LinkedIn. How many of you have seen any, traces of Microsoft on LinkedIn? when they decided to buy that, they said, you know what, we are going to let you run the business the way you want to run the business. We are not going to change that. So that was one of the very interesting results of this. And they want to do with GitHub exactly the same. So it would be a wholly owned company by Microsoft, but they will run the things exactly like they did before. So enough with that, with the introduction. Let's start to talk about .NET. Of course, .NET, if any of you remembers, is just a marketing name. It means a lot of things. It can be, you know, I've been in this industry for a very long time, and Microsoft has overused this name for like everything. You had .NET servers, which was an Exchange or a SQL or a Windows, whatever. Everything that you can put a .NET or can have something to do with .NET was called a .NET server. So when we look at .NET, it's a platform. But you can use that to build all kinds of applications, desktop applications, web applications, cloud applications, mobile, games, IoT, and AI. So all of them actually have a home inside .NET. So we can get to work with that. If we look at .NET, it's going strong. It's stronger. It passed the 10 years mark. It passed the 15 years mark. Actually, last year, we celebrated the 20 years anniversary of .NET. That was when the first time Microsoft announced that they are working on something. The very first release came back in 2000, so we are still not 20 years there. We get something called the .NET Core, which I'm going to talk a little bit more in few slides. But that doesn't mean that .NET Framework will go away. So Microsoft is still doing a lot of development. We have a version called 4.72, and we have a 4.8 that is coming. And if you look at what Microsoft is saying, they have over 1 million downloads monthly of .NET Core. Of course, that doesn't mean you have new developers monthly, because it's not really the same thing. Even if you want to run an application or you want to deploy it somewhere in a container, you will end up by downloading ASP.NET Core. So that's not really, you know, that's not really what the numbers are saying. But there are a lot of people working with .NET actively, and .NET Core, the same. It's a very active platform, and they have a lot of things. I have a link here. I will make the presentation available at the end of this session, so you can actually you can look at it and you can take this. It is from Microsoft Ignite 2 months ago, where Scott Hunter and Scott Hanselman actually do a bit of a roadmap and where they want to take this the platform, both .NET Framework and .NET Core. So you would get a lot of information about that. So let's have a look at .NET Framework. The current version is 4.7.2, which is an incremental update from 4.7.1. Microsoft is still enhancing and supporting that. So it's not like, oh, now because we have .NET Core, it means we are going to move away. No, we are not. The only thing Microsoft says, this is actually for the big applications like Office 365, Dynamics, SharePoint, Bing. All of them are using the full .NET Framework because they really need a lot of the services available in there. And because of that, they do a slower update on that. But they have a lot of maintenance updates as well. So if there is something wrong with it, they will go and fix it and make sure that we get everything up and running. Now, if we look at the roadmap, we have .NET Framework 4.8 in sight, meaning that Microsoft is working. They will announce it soon, or they will release it soon. Then they announced it already. It might be next month at Connect. I don't know. There is not. They did not say yet what they are going to release, but there are a lot of speculations, and that might be one of them. They improved stuff like modern browsers that you are using. So if you want to show a web page inside your WinForm application today, you would need to load an Internet Explorer ActiveX. So let me repeat, Internet Explorer. It's not Edge, it's not Chrome, it's not Safari, it's an Internet Explorer. It's not. I don't even think it qualifies as browser anymore. But that's what you get today if you wanna put it in a WinForm. So Microsoft will change that, so we'll have actually Edge available as a control inside our applications. Will give us access to touch and UWP controls, so it is easier for us to work with that to create modern applications, and has support for high DPI. Again, if you think about it, whenever you look at an older WinForm application on a 4K or on 8K monitors, it looks dreadful. So that's what Microsoft is improving with the new version of 4.8. What they're trying to do as well, it's not breaking people's applications. because there are over 2 billion installs and they have a lot of applications running on .NET Framework, so they want to make sure that everything stays the same. And they want to make your application more modern. Now, one of the problems we always had with the .NET Framework, it's the lack of side-by-side support. Now, this sounds like, you know, like a no-brainer. But one of the things Microsoft promised at the very beginning was that, yes, you get .NET. .NET would be this platform-independent, language-independent, you know, framework that you can run side by side and you can do whatever you want. Now, that was the first promise. Then they went back a little bit and they said, you know what, yes, platform-independent as long as it's Win32. That was the, you know, that was, it's still platform independent. If you think about the Windows 95, that was the very first operating system that supported .NET Framework, it still means a lot, you know, and they did a lot of work in that space. But if you want to run an application written to target 4.5 and another one to target 4.8, that won't be possible. So that's why they are still bound to keep the backward compatibility. So if you really want to run them side by side and you upgrade your framework, a 4.0 application actually, or a 4.5 should still be able to run with .NET Framework 4.8 installed on your machine. So this is one of the biggest challenges they are facing. So that's why they decided to have .NET Core. Now, the .NET Core story is an interesting one. What Microsoft did first and foremost, they created the ASP.NET Core. And then the bigger .NET team realized, oh, wait, but if you have an ASP.NET, we need to have the whole framework as well for other applications and for other things. So let us do that. So the very first version of ASP.NET Core 1.0 was not getting too much adoption exactly because of that, because they wanted to go back and do the .NET Core correctly. So 1.1 was the first, I would say, semi-version that we got. And the real version was 2.0. Like, everybody waits for the second version just to make sure that we get everything we need. It is a re-envisioning of the .NET framework. And if you look now, actually, we do have the cross-platform. It's not a Win32 only. You can run it on Mac, you can run it on Linux. It's an open source framework. Again, everything is done out in the open. And it's a subset of .NET Framework, meaning that you can run any .NET Core application on a machine that has .NET Framework, the full .NET Framework installed. Or you can run it only with the, you know, with the core version if you want, if you don't want to install the full framework. And it has truly side-by-side support. And the reason for that is because they are using folder for versioning, and if you want to use version 4 or 2.1 and 2.2 and run them on the same machine, there will be no problem because they know exactly which one should they go to. So if we look at the roadmap, we have 2.1 released and available. We have 2.2 Preview 3. It is available for download. And we have .NET Core 3.0 on the horizon. They announced it in May, and there is a public preview, or there will be a public preview soon. There are some bits and pieces that you can download already today if you want to start playing with, but it's, you know, there are nightly builds. It's nothing stable there, so you wouldn't have anything to really, you know, use in production. But you can play with it if you want to start doing that. There is a blog post from last month. You can have a look at it again. If you look at update on the .NET Core 3.0. And what is on the .NET 4.8, you can read the blog post and they'll give you more details about all the things that I showed you. So when we look at .NET Core 2.1, Microsoft, the one thing that you would see, the recurring theme that you would see in all those newer releases is that we want to have a better performance. So if you look at how much it would take, for instance, to build an application and how much they improved from 2.0 to 2.1, the smaller, the better here, because it's how much time it takes to compile either a small web application or a big web application. So based on that, they will tell you, you know, how good it is. So if you look at the web large, you get a 10-fold improvement in the time of for the time of compiling your application. It's not only it compiles fast, it runs faster as well. So if you want to handle plain text, for instance, you got a 15% increase in speed. If you want to handle JSON files, you got an 18% increase in speed. If you want to go to read data from the database using generic ORMs, you got a 147% improved in speed. So it's much, much faster. So again, Microsoft is doing a lot of work in this space. If you want to move to, if you already work with .NET Core and you target .NET Core 2.0, I really recommend to look into 2.1. If you haven't done that yet, maybe wait a couple of weeks and then you could look into 2.2. Again, I hope Microsoft will release that at Connect next month. Again, it's nothing announced. I have no idea what they will announce there. It's just some idea. Other things that are new in .NET Core 2.1 are new data types like span of T or tensor of T. Microsoft created something they call the Windows Compatibility Pack. That would give you access to about 20,000 APIs available in the .NET framework that you normally wouldn't have available with .NET Core. So they added those kind of things. Improvement on the sockets, on the HTTP client. They have they added more crypto standards when you work with cryptography in your application, and they improve the performance and efficiency of the applications. ASP.NET Core 2.1 added some more things as well. We have SignalR, we have HTTPS, we have GDPR support added there. They improved the Swagger support for with Web API conventions. They added more support for Razor pages, and they have a UI. They have a library of UI controls that you can use already, and they added support for webhooks. So if you use a lot of IFTTT or GitHub webhooks or Azure functions and so on, you have improved support for that as well. And they have the .NET Entity Framework Core 2.1. Again, it's not the full version. It's not like the 6 one. The 3 might actually come very close to what the full Entity Framework version has to do, but they added more things, or they improved more things. One, I think, important aspect is the support for Cosmos DB. So now they have a Cosmos DB provider, and you can just go and read the data from a Cosmos DB database. Code Magazine, it's a company, so we work together in this presentation. They have an issue in July, August of the Code Magazine, and in that issue of the Code Magazine, you will get, it's written together with Microsoft, and it is dedicated to .NET Core 2.1. So you'll get a lot of articles written by industry experts about that. If we look at .NET Core 2.2, again, they improve the performance. They will have better web API development. They have better support for Microsoft Azure and for microservices. And they are in preview 3 at the moment. If you want, you can download it. Stuff like multi-tier just-in-time compilation. So instead of doing the compilation in one step, they are doing it in several steps in order to improve the performance and create optimized code. They now have support for SQL connection authentication tokens, so you can actually increase the way you work in a secure way with your database, and so on. Again, you will have this available, this presentation available. What's more important is .NET Core 3.0. It would actually improve, again, the performance and the things that they are doing, but it would add support for Windows desktop applications. It would add support for IoT and for AI. It is supported now. It will be supported the side-by-side versioning for the .NET. You can do WinForms and WPF applications, and you can have, again, multiple versions of the same .NET framework on your machine. You can embed .NET Framework in your application. So if you create a Windows application, a WinForm or a WPF, you can have the whole .NET Core embedded in your application, and you can run it on any machine you want, as long as it's a Windows machine. And it takes care of the full .NET Core features. So whatever you have, whatever enhancements you bring, they will be available here. So when we talk about Windows Desktop, it is Windows and WPF, so it won't run on Linux. At least I'm not aware that they are working on anything like that. And let's face it, I don't think, I think they realize that they are not the first one to try. There are many that try to create a library that will allow you to create a UI application that you can run both on Windows and on Linux. I don't know how many of you remember the Java clients, and ugly as, as night, I would say. So, of course, you don't want to. I don't think that's where they are going. And there are a lot of other challenges for them in order to make it run on any Linux platform. So that's why I don't think they're not going there. So it does require Windows, but it would be a rewritten version. It would be faster. They can use the things that they are putting into the .NET Core, so they can use them for the Windows applications as well. And you can create your self-contained applications. Another thing Microsoft announced is called the XAML Islands. XAML Islands gives you the possibility to use UWP controls in your WinForms applications and the other way around, WinForms controls in your UWP application. They've done that before. It's not a new thing. They've done it with WPF and WinForms. Now they do it again with XAML or with UWP and that. Then we have .NET Standard. .NET Standard, it's, as the name implies, it is a standard. So it's no library. It's just a set of API that Microsoft says those would need to be supported in order for you to be able to call yourself to be able to work on the .NET Standard. So if an application is targeting .NET Standard, what that means, it means that I can get everything, I can run it either on the .NET Core, on the .NET Framework, I can run it on Mono, I can run it on a phone, and so on and so on. So the reason for that is Microsoft wanted to make sure that you can run applications that are actually libraries that can target different frameworks. There was PCL before. This is the same thing. The problem with the PCL, I think, was that PCL was a portable class library. Was really, the idea was good, the implementation was very bad. I would say the .NET Standard is a very good, it's both the good idea and the good implementation so far. So let's give them the benefit of a doubt for the time being. So, talking about that, we need to move into web development. So when we start talking about the web development, we have some things that need to be considered. The first one is where we are at today. So the first problem is we have ASP.NET. So ASP.NET has been around for many, many years, and you have the web forms. So with web forms, you could easily create a new application, and you did a lot of drag and drop. You really didn't have to think about what your application is doing. So a lot of stuff were happening on the server side, but the more modern your application becomes, the more modern you want to have your web application, the least you would have to do on the server side. Because a lot of things that have to do with rendering should more or less happen on the client side. And that's why we have the HTML5 client. So once HTML5 took off, then a lot of things started to show up in this space and make it much easier for us. So we have stuff like Angular, we have stuff like React, we have Vue.js, we have Aurelia. So there are a lot of contenders in this space, and we're going to talk about every single one of them. And of course, if you use that, you have to use Node.js. Why? Because Node.js, it's the compiler for your development tool. Let's put it this way. I think that would explain a lot. You have to understand JavaScript just to be able to start developing on your machine if you want to do anything related to JavaScript or to client development and so on, which is I think it's a bit strange. But let's see what we have. First of all, we have ASP.NET. So when we talk about ASP.NET, again, we have two different versions. We have the Classic and the Core. Now, there is one big problem with the Classic. Whenever you want to start a web application, you have to load at least one DLL called system.web.dll, which is about 980K big, which is huge if we want to use, to quote someone. It can only be hosted in IIS, meaning that if you create your application, you won't be able to deploy it and use it in an Apache if that's what you want, or NGINX or something like that. You will have to use it together with the IIS. Now, that might not be a problem because IIS, it's actually quite good, and they did a lot of work on that space, so the IIS got the improvements that it needed. But I think the problem comes to the fact that ASP.NET and IIS move at different speeds. So IIS and the ASP.NET are not developing as fast as the web and all the standards that are available to the web. So that's why Microsoft had to do something different. There is another thing. Being such a big library, it's very hard to optimize, especially for speed or for lightweight applications. So even if you want to create a Hello World web page, it's still over 980 kbps if you want to deploy it because of the system.web.dll that has to come with it. So of course, Microsoft thought, how can we make that better? So that's why they started with ASP.NET Core. I've seen ASP.NET Core for the very first time about 6 years ago. That's when Microsoft took us to Redmond, and they showed us what they have in the pipe. So that was even before they decided they will have a .NET Core. They said, we have a problem. We have this big beast that we call Azure, and we have a lot of people that we want them to use our web applications. We still want them to do ASP.NET, and they need to deploy it, or we want them to deploy it on Azure. What that means, it means that whenever you have a new application that takes so much space, you are not using your resources as it should. So they want to be able to put as many applications as possible, in as little resources as possible. So the more, the bigger your application is, the less you would be able to have several ones running on the same machine. So what they did, they said, okay, let's start from scratch. Let's make it run, let's see how we can make it better. We need to use the same kind of artifacts like we are using now. I think we are going to teach web forms. They are not teaching web forms from ASP.NET. They are teaching web forms from ASP.NET Core. So ASP.NET Core won't be using, won't have any version of web forms. Not yet. Maybe they are working. I have no idea again. They might do something on that if they see that there is really a need for that, because there are a lot of enterprise customers still using web forms. Out of curiosity, how many of you are still doing web forms programming? Okay, that's actually a fair amount. Yeah, it's nothing to be ashamed. I'm still doing it as well, so nothing to be ashamed. It was just for me, for my own curiosity. And I will tell you this: I still have customers using VB6, like pre.NET era. And that's only, and that's the only reason they still run on Windows Server 2003, because that's the only configuration that supports VB6 and classic ASP applications, not ASP.NET, ASP applications. And there are a lot of companies like that in the States that are using this kind of stack. So it's not, it's nothing to be ashamed of, again. So when they started doing that, they said, we need to give the people like a menu. They need to pick and choose what they want to run inside their applications. We don't want them to just go and you get the whole system.web and there is nothing you can do about it. You just have to run it. And they wanted to improve the cloud operations. So that's why they decided we might actually want to put that on a Linux machine. Why? Because the Linux has a smaller footprint and is much easier for us to run the application. So now when you create a .NET Core application, you don't really have to decide where do you want to run it. If you want to run it on a Windows or on a Linux machine, you can just say, I want an ASP.NET Core, and when I want to deploy it, I would see whatever machine I have at my disposal to run it. So MVC Core, what they did, they married Web API and the MVC part of the ASP.NET, meaning that we don't really need to have two different controllers just to be able to do our work with applications. So when we look at the ASP.NET Core stack, we have the operating system. We can run it either in the IIS or we can run it as a self-hosted. If we run it in the IIS, we can run it with the .NET CLR. If we run it as a self-hosted, we can run it with the .NET Core CLR. And then we have all our middleware, the stuff that we need to work with, like the Web APIs part, the MVC part, and the Web Pages part as part of the ASP.NET. Now, if we do want to do a comparison, because there are two versions of the .NET Runtime, the .NET Core, again, runs on both of them, both on the full .NET Runtime and on the .NET Core Runtime. Because the .NET Core Runtime, it's a subset of the full .NET. That's what it is. But if you want to run it cross-platform, the only one you can use is the .NET Core, again. So that's why you want to do that. And again, let me reinforce that .NET 4 is here to stay. So Microsoft won't remove it because they have they have a very big customer base on that. And there are many customers, actually there are a lot of customers that they haven't even made the move from .NET, the full .NET framework to .NET Core. How many of you are using .NET Core? Okay, so that's a big number. Good. Yeah. So let's talk about HTML5. Now, this is one of the very interesting areas, I would say. And the reason for this is how much this landscape changes every single day. I don't know how many of you, I might need to find that picture. How many of you have seen the picture with Homer Simpson saying how many days, without a new JavaScript? And like, you want to put one there and then, no, there is a new one just announced, so you have to put 0 back on top. So there are coming every day new frameworks, or at least if they are not new frameworks, they have a new version, and a lot of things have changed, and you need to rethink the way you have done your job so far. So if we look at that, there are few of them, or actually quite many, I would say. But the reason what made them so popular was the birth of single-page applications. What does it mean, single-page application? It doesn't mean that you only have one page in your application. It means that you download all the resources as one page, and then you change the look of your page based on the data. So you have the data that drives how your application would look like at the end of the day. And there are some contenders in this space. We have Angular, we have React, we have Aurelia, and we have Vue.js, just to name a few. Very, very few. Okay? The most popular of them at the moment are Angular and React, but the other two are quite good alternatives. So let me start talking about each and every one of them. First one is Angular, and Angular rise to fame would be the fact that it's backed by Google, which I don't know if that's the best argument you can have if you choose a framework. Oh, it's backed by Google, because let's face it, Google has a history of killing products regardless of their popularity or the lack of popularity. If we think about the Google Plus, for instance. Although the Google Plus story, I don't know if you're familiar, is not really the lack of popularity, it's actually the lack of responsibility from Google. They lacked a lot of usernames and passwords. They are not sure how many, and if they really did, because they keep only 2 weeks worth of auditing data. And they discovered that happened about a month ago, so the whole thing that would keep the information is gone already. But they can guarantee it's only the usernames that they got lost. It's not the passwords, but they're not sure. They cannot prove that. So, okay, sorry about the digression. Sometimes, I need to vent out those kind of things. But again, going back to Angular, what Google did, they pulled a Microsoft on us. What do I mean by they pulled a Microsoft on us? Remember when I said the .NET, the overused name, that Microsoft is using it everywhere? Yeah, they did the same thing with Angular. We had AngularJS, which was actually very popular. It was a MVVM framework created by the Google team and had become very popular. But then they decided they had made some architectural misjudgments. So they want to go and start with a clean slate. And what they decided back then was to create a new framework. And of course, which name should they give it? Angular. They skipped the JS, and they were thinking, yeah, that would be enough. Now, thinking that Google is a search company, and if you go and search for Angular, even today, I think, maybe today not, but about 3 months ago, if you would go and look for Angular, you'd still get more relevant answers on AngularJS, not on Angular. So even if you want to do something, you won't be able to do it. As a developer, I always have like 3 monitors. Here I'm doing my development, here I'm doing my debugging, here I'm doing my Stack Overflow in Google Foo. So of course, if that's not working, if I don't get the answer, how can I do my job? So they decided they want to start from scratch. Now, it is very bloated. If you look at Angular, and I'm talking about the experience. I worked in projects, we use Angular, and at the beginning, the very first version I used of Angular was actually Alpha 45. So I started a long time ago. They're using TypeScript as a language, which kind of makes sense. It's much better, but it uses a lot of meta-programming just to do some simple things, which sometimes can become a little bit hard to debug and a little hard to understand for you as a developer if you're not really familiar with that. It is very opinionated, so you either do it their way or you don't do it at all. Now, the nice part is that they created a CLI the command line interface that will help you a lot. So if you want to create new artifacts, new things, you just use one of their recipes, and then it will create all of those for you. So you don't really have to do that. In theory, you just have to go and start writing code. But again, this is theory. The practice can be a little bit different. It used to be called Angular 2, then Angular 4, Angular 6, and by the Angular 7, they realized, what are we doing here? Maybe we should stop putting the number after that, because it still doesn't make any sense. It's still the same Angular, non-Angular JS that we are talking about, so let's keep this name. Then we have React. React comes from Facebook. So one of the things, I think, one of the, the decisive points in Angular, or when they start working with Angular, was, they used something called the fear-based development. They were afraid of React, so a lot of the decisions they made by looking at React and what made React so popular. React, it's a JavaScript library, but it's only done for the UI. So if you want to do something else with it, you would need to use other stuff. Like one of the most popular one would be Redux. So you'd need to use a library called Redux that together with React would help you create your application. Now, a lot of people are asking me, what should I choose, Angular or React? If those are the two choices you have to make, I would say look at what kind of application you want to do. If you want to do a CRUD application, go for Angular. It's very easy. You have your view model, you have your view, and that's it. Now, if you have a lot of server push, so your application is more of a reactive kind of application, like Facebook it is, you are not doing too much data entry, but you get a lot of data that comes from the server, and you want to be able to update the UI continuously, then go and use React. Now, there is another problem with React that I really don't like, and that's called the JSX. Whenever you talk with people, that are into React, and again, I worked with React for a long time, so I talk about that from experience. JSX is that combination between JavaScript and HTML, but whenever you ask someone that it's a very big fan of React, they'll tell you, no, that's not it. That's actually JSX. You are not understanding, my friend, what's about. It's actually exactly what it is about. It's an HTML and JavaScript in the same file. And one of the things I've learned as a Microsoft developer was that you should not mix code and UI information. They still do it. It is, they have added some improvements into the mix, but I still think that was one of the problems. The other problem with React that I see, again, it's the use of Redux. Redux requires you to have a computer science degree. Let's face it, you need to understand higher order functions, you need to understand functional programming, you need to understand MapReduce. So there are a lot of things that are happening in there, and you can see a lot of people doing copy and paste without ever understanding what exactly they are copying and pasting, but they saw that that one was working there, so it should work here without any problem. And if they hit if they hit a hard spot, they don't understand what happened and why that is like this. So if we look at those two, Angular claims they are the most popular one, but when they count the numbers, they count it for both AngularJS and Angular. So I don't know, they don't have a real, hard border between which is AngularJS and how do they work. If you want to move from AngularJS to Angular, I think the only way for you would have been to start writing your AngularJS application from the very beginning in TypeScript. Because if you'd have done that, it's actually quite easy. For me, it was quite easy to move my application anyway. But I'd done a lot of other things, a lot of other decisions that helped me along the way. So again, this might be a thing. Otherwise, my recommendation is go and start from scratch, because that will make more sense. The next one is Vue.js. Vue.js, it's again a lightweight JavaScript framework. It should be much better than Angular. It uses the best parts of Angular and React together. The guy working on that worked on React at the beginning. I have no experience whatsoever, so I cannot have any opinions about that. And I won't bash it and I know it's unfair, but I haven't worked with it, so I don't know what to complain about. So, last but not least, this is my favorite actually. It's Aurelia. Now, Aurelia's biggest problem is the lack of big muscles behind it. So it's one guy that decided he wanted to do something to improve the quality of web application development. It uses simple conventions, and everything is based on standards. So if you look, every single decision they made sure that it is based on the standards. So if you want to develop an application, an MVVM-style application, when you create a new view, you have a model which uses the same name as the view. So if you have a JS and an HTML file, the framework marries them directly, and it knows, oh, okay, so this one would use this as a view, so I can get the model from here, I can understand how the model works, and all the things are just working. And they use a lot of, so they use a lot of things. They have a rapid adoption, and there is a large active community. Now, again, I might be biased. I really like Rob. We work together. I did a lot of workshops on Aurelia as well, and I like it as a framework. And it is, as an enterprise developer, that's what bugs me. Like, it's much easier for me to develop an application using that than using any other framework. But a lot of enterprises are saying, yes, but you know what? It's just one guy. What if he's not here tomorrow? Fair point. I don't know. That's the whole thing. But if you look at how it looks, and the promise of open source is like, oh, but you always get the source code. If you want to change it, you can change it. If you want to continue to develop it, you can continue to develop it for yourself. So, last part of this presentation now would be the WebAssembly part. So, what's WebAssembly? Well, WebAssembly, it's the way we want to change the web. So it's actually binary code for web browsers. Of course, JavaScript is the assembly language for the web, but this is actually the binary code for the web. Let me put it this way, okay? How many of you have worked with, so if you think about it, we can use that, like if you run a WebAssembly application, we can run it on any browser, okay? If you remember, Silverlight promised that. How many of you have used Silverlight? Okay, that's not it. So just don't be afraid. It's not using any plugin models, meaning that it would be able to be run on any browser you want. It has support for you to run it actually. If you want to run it on Chrome, it can be done. Safari was a little bit behind, but now they actually say, yes, we want to be part of it, because they see the amount of people that say we are really interested in that and we really want to work it. And if you can, it has target for any language in theory. Why? Because if you can compile your application from language X into a bytecode format that's specified by the WebAssembly, then you have no problem. You can run your application straight into the browser. There are some limitations, but then again, you need a bridge to be able to communicate with the document object model. You need other things, but those are offered by the platform itself. So when we look at this one, we have .NET Mono, and .NET Mono was actually a project that the guys that are doing Xamarin were trying to do and say, how can we take this, what we have now, like a .NET application, compile it and run it as a WebAssembly. And that was actually a very successful, project. So the question comes now: why using .NET for browser applications? I mean, we had ASP.NET. Yes and no. ASP.NET, what it did as web forms, for instance, and even on the MVC, it renders or it creates the HTML page on the server. So you have to compile the stuff on the server. You have to do a lot of work on the server, which actually doesn't bring any business value. The only thing it does for you is just to help you render the page itself. So if you can move that to the client, that would be much better. Plus that you need a lot of JavaScript or a lot of things to be able to do data validation and so on. So that would be one of the things. But it's as well very easy to get started. Now, if you use Blazor, which I will show in a second, you can just say file or .NET new Blazor, and you create a Blazor application with support for that. It's based on .NET Standard, so you can use .NET Standard, and you can use actually any MS Build tool to compile that. It works with C#, F#, and with Razor. Again, being .NET-based tools and languages and libraries, it works without any problem. You will have support for Visual Studio. You'll have support for IntelliSense. And it's fast and it's scalable, so you can use it as well for, together with .NET Core applications. So that's why Microsoft created something that's called Blazor. So Blazor, it's browser plus Razor. That's what the name came from. It is created by the same guy that once upon a time created the Knockout library, Steven Sanderson. So he is actually really good at doing that. And I just found out 2 weeks ago that Microsoft it is committed now to Blazor, which is actually a very good thing. So far, this was an experimental library, an experimental work, meaning that Microsoft was looking at how can we take this information, how can we make it available to developers, and then how can we go and maybe make some decisions based on that. Looking at the intakes and how many developers are using that, Microsoft decided this is something that we want to do. So they will support that. So if you want to start to do a new application, if you really want to know what you want to use, I would recommend you go and look for Blazor.net, because that's the future. Okay? And with that being said, I want to thank you for this first part. The next part, we are going to talk about tools and languages. We are going to talk about containers. We are going to talk about Azure. We are going to talk about AI, ML. We are going to talk about blockchain. Okay? Thank you.